Hi everyone, we are back with an essential session on C++, hitting the C++ spot. I'm going to hand over immediately to Dr. Jake Habgood from Sumo, who is going to introduce you to some very experienced speakers. Jake.
So hello, and welcome to our panel on C++ as a key industry skill for game programmers. I think we've already heard today about how university lecturers are facing unprecedented challenges in their roles right now, and certainly a lot of extra stress and strain on them. And I think, many students will be soon having to balance the demands of work and studies again. And I think that's inevitably going to lead to both students and lecturers having to prioritize their workloads. And I think C++ as one of those more difficult subjects, perhaps more challenging to teach, more challenging to learn, is one that could find itself in the firing line for all sorts of reasons. The idea of this panel then is to spend some time exploring why the industry considers C++ to be such an important skill for game programmers to possess. So as Rick said, I'm Jake Habgood, Director of Education Partnerships with the Sumo Digital Group. With me to discuss this topic, we have four industry experts, Claire Blackshaw, Guy Davidson, Deepak Granth, and Claire Rogers. And if I can just begin by getting you all to introduce yourself briefly and explain your connection with this topic. So shall we start with Claire Blackshaw?
Hi, I've been in the games industry for about 15 years. Most recently, I've been working for Sony. I just left them to pursue more VR stuff. So I've been bounced between a whole bunch of different studios in a whole bunch of different roles, but most recently I was working on Dreams.
Cool. Guy?
Hello, my name's Guy Davidson, and I'm the Principal Coding Manager at Curated Assembly. I've been in the games industry for far too long. I wrote my first game in 1980 on an Acorn Atom. I'm the first filter when it comes to the graduate programmer role, which we launched yesterday. We're into our third year of a graduate program. Do visit the website, do come and consider working with Creative Assembly because it's great.
Cool, good plug. And Deepa?
Hi everyone, I'm Deepak Granth. I am code manager at nDreams. Been in the games industry a year now. Been previously managing software development teams in the telecoms industry.
Cool. And Claire Rogers.
Hi, I'm Claire Rogers. I've been in the games industry for nearly 25 years this year, starting at Signosis, going on to Sony Liverpool, which was the same company essentially, EA, Sony R&D again, working for myself, now kind of cross between doing contract work and independent game development. So yeah,
brilliant.
Done it all.
So we've got an enormous amount of experience here. I'd like to begin by, imagine you were talking to a game programming student who's about to start a module on C++ game programming. Why should they care? Why is C++ so important to the games industry? So who'd like to take this first? Guy, do you want to?
C++ is really important to the games industry. It is a language which gets you very close to the metal. It's just fast, really. When you look at all the languages that are out there, C++ is the one that delivers performance efficiency. And also it does what you tell it to do. There's very little going on behind the scenes. And this comes at a cost. You have to be quite careful about what you ask your compiler to do for you. But once you understand those costs, the performance is unparalleled. So we've been using C++ at Creative Assembly for over 20 years now. I don't see us changing into anything else anytime soon.
Yeah. Claire Rogers?
Basically echoing everything that Guy said. It's the predominant language used in the industry. It has been for a long, long time, and there's not a lot on the horizon that's going to touch it. Pretty much everyone's still using it, with the possible exception of Unity.
So, Deepa?
Yeah, I mean, I think Claire and Kai have kind of covered it. It does, I think C++ gives you the, some low-level features that allows you to control the resources, such as like memory management, for example. This allows you to like write performant and optimal code, especially when you want to get the most out of like, computational graphics power out of an engine. Also, most of like engines are written in C++. So I think understanding how C++ works, its algorithms and principles, allows you to make the best use of an engine as well. Yeah.
Yeah, really good point. Claire, Blackshaw?
So C++ isn't the best language, but it's the language that is dominant. And if you want good pay and interesting jobs, like you want to talk directly to hardware, consoles, VR, brain-computer interfaces, any of the cool new stuff, I guarantee you before there's any other interface, there will be a C or a C++ interface.
Cool. Okay, so thinking again of this student studying C++, what level of C++ would you expect a graduate to be able to demonstrate for a programming role once they've reached the end of their course? So if we maybe start with you again, Claire Blackshaw.
Sure. So the big thing is C++ is huge, and even people who've worked in the industry and are some of the top programmers still trip over some of its weird bits. The key thing I'd say to you is go out and grab real code, a real library, something big, and just get it to compile and be familiar with how to walk through C++ code bases.
And Guy, you use C++ a lot. What do you expect of graduates at Creative Assembly?
It's a tricky one to answer because level is a strange word with C++. You can write your first program in C++ and compile it and link it and debug it. And being able to debug is really important. But you can do all those things in a day. But acquiring the subtleties is obviously going to take longer. The most important thing is to simply be able to use the tool set, to be able to use the compiler and the linker and the debugger. And the language is actually very small. There's only about 40 keywords in C++. I'm just picking that number out. I'm sure somebody will tell me it's a different number, but there really aren't many keywords in C++. It's an easy language to learn, but it does take a lot of mastery.
So what about you, Deepa and Claire? I mean, in terms of the kinds of work you do at nDreams, Deepa, I mean, you're working with game engines as well. So, what do you expect from graduates in terms of C++?
I think an understanding, or I think what's important from my perspective is knowing how to tackle a problem and understanding the best way of making use of what C++ has to offer, and yeah, being able to just making best use of it really. I think is important. Debugging as well, being able to debug code is quite important.
Yeah, I think we'll get on to debugging in a moment. But Claire, I think you even use just plain C sometimes. So
I do now, yes, but that's only really been for the last year and a half. And that was more of an experiment than anything else. So I would say, and I kind of know where Guy's coming from, the language itself, C++ is quite a small language. It's everything else about the language, all the standard libraries and template libraries and what have you that make it, I would say, a monstrosity. And it's the primary reason I've gone back to working in C directly, just because that's where my background started. But and I've forgotten the main thrust of the question. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, there are different styles to programming in C. I mean, and a lot of people in the games industry will say just treat it as C++ classes, or I mean, I tend to say up to C++ 11, and beyond that, I haven't really delved. And I think most people in the games industry, there's a kind of, I don't know, sane C++. I mean, Guy probably won't agree. Guy seems to be very, very up on modern C++ and everything, and that's wonderful and great. But for me, it's scary.
So is it fair to say that sort of across the industry as a whole, then you might see a wide range of C++ styles right through from C++ 98 to 17 and beyond.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, but the commonality there is a language which gives you that precise control over memory and speed that, and it's that understanding of how that works that is valued, I suppose, rather than the...
Absolutely. Yeah. And having an understanding what's going on at the hardware level is invaluable, I would say.
So, I mean, several of you already touched on debugging skills, and anybody that's ever been in a Tiger accreditation panel with me will have been asked this question. But how important are debugging skills, and how can they be taught on courses effectively? Who wants to take this? Claire, Blackshaw?
Sure. So debugging skills. The biggest problem students generally have is they haven't worked on real code, which is why I always say go grab bigger code bases to play with and debug. I guarantee you as a junior, the first thing you're going to be given is fixing small bits of mess. And the quicker you are able to step through code, build an understanding and fix small bugs without making huge changes, the more effective you'll be.
Cool. Deepa?
I think debugging is definitely not a skill that can be learnt as in like taught to someone. It's something that you need to practice on your own. It is important because, in my opinion, it's a transferable skill between different programming languages. It helps you to visualize logic and also understand how code, the sequence of flow, the code's execution process rather. The best way to do this would be using breakpoints, use a debugger, run your code through a debugger, continuously testing your code, like having unit tests, practice practice debugging.
Cool. Anything you would add onto that, Claire Rogers?
Yes, if you want to become really good at debugging, well, first of all, use the debugger. Secondly, become a graphics programmer, because in my experience, as soon as something goes wrong on the screen and the graphics flash or something like that, everyone assumes it's a graphics bug, and they will give you the bug and you will have to find it. And so yeah, if you want to get good at debugging, become a graphics programmer, because you'll be fixing bugs, other people's bugs usually, all the time. So a bit of a joke there, but.
So, I mean, I suppose one thing I found that people don't necessarily realize is sort of how well integrated the debuggers are these days in the sort of console development platforms and the profilers. I mean, is that something, Guy, you would recognize? Do you?
Yes, certainly when Visual Studio, when Microsoft Visual C came out in 1992, it was the first time I was using an integrated development environment. Everything was lumped together. You had an editor and a debugger. It was all in one place. Everything was lovely, and it absolutely transformed my productivity. Before then, I was launching a process and then launching a debugger and attaching the debugger to the process, and then taking a look at what the registers were and what the assembly was. And the idea of being able to, gleefully hop through code and go to code from call stacks was a dream, a mirage. It's a lot. I don't want to sound like the old program, but well, you don't know, you're born. You really don't. Debuggers today are fantastic. They are just amazing, and investing time in learning how to use them properly will reward you enormously.
Definitely. I suppose that comes back to your point, Deepa, about it being a transferable skill, and it does definitely transfer across platforms. We've a lot to thank SN Systems for. So.
Yeah, and I would also add to that before we get off it, actually, just because none of us mentioned it, is having a bit of knowledge about the old techniques that Guy was talking about looking at assembly, being able to look at registers, because occasionally you will get a bug that's in release only, and literally a weekend spent reading up on assembly will level you up immediately.
Yeah, the x86 assembly looks really fearsome, but you really only need to know about 20 instructions. That 20 instructions will cover 95% of your code. Once you just learn how to read assembly, it becomes so much more meaningful. Just teaching somebody how a flag register works is is invaluable. Stack pointers, program counter, flag register. That's all you need.
Brilliant. Okay, so when a graduate then is applying to your company, what does a C++ test look like for your company? Do you still do that kind of thing? And where do you see the future of that? Claire, Blackshaw.
So thankfully, the whiteboard technical test and some of the old school tests you might have heard horror stories about have become less common. They weren't very effective. The best test I've seen in a company that I've worked for is we gave them a faulty version of a game and we asked them to improve that game.
Cool. I mean, that sounds like a good test. Deepa, what kind of questions do you ask?
Yeah, I not like to call it a test. I think it's more rather it's more of like a verbal discussion. We go through. It's more of a way to understand the candidate's understanding of C++. At nDreams, we kind of go through like various semantics and what the best use of it is, like understand like how well they can use certain, what C++ has to offer. We also give like a big question, which we don't expect people to, solve. It's more about their way of tackling ambiguity or unknowns. That's more important for us. And also, when given a big problem, there's various angles that a person might, go towards. It might be graphics or AI. That kind of allows us to understand where the mindset is at.
So, I mean, is a C++ test inevitable then, Guy, when you're interviewing lots of candidates?
You do need to make sure a C++ test is a very easy way of making sure that a candidate isn't, overstating their skills. If they know what a while loop is, if they know what casting means, if they know what a destructor is, those sorts of things. So it's an effective first filter. But you're not. I wouldn't discard somebody for getting a bad score on a test, unless it's called 5%. Do they actually understand what the language is? It's a way of, it's a way of filtering out the people who really don't know what they're on about, who are just taking a chance. I much prefer to discuss with people what they'd be doing, to look at their portfolios. And the best way to get my attention is to show me a really decent portfolio, full of stuff that I can look at on GitHub and that I can run. If I can fork a branch and then put it on my machine and then just build it and run it, that shows me that you know the entire ecosystem, not just C++ source files, but you know how to build and run things and how to enable other people to build and run things. And that's as valuable a skill as being able to hit compile.
So what does a good C++ portfolio demo look like then, Claire Blackshaw?
Good C++ portfolio, the main thing I'd say, doesn't have to be video games related. Obviously, knowing video game libraries, graphic libraries, VR libraries, any kind of libraries like that helps. But really what we're looking for is an understanding. So if you have any cool, interesting code that you can put together, that's useful.
So would would a C++ demo be at the top of the portfolio demo list then?
For a programmer, usually, yeah. Looking at something they've built in a game engine, it's very hard to evaluate what they've done because the game engine provides so much for them. And, looking at just a simple C++ project they've put together, even if it isn't very impressive on screen, it will be interesting to look at and immediately give you a gauge of their coding style and their skills.
So what kind of portfolio demos do you value then, Deepa?
I think especially like portfolios that very clearly mention what, especially if they've put in like group projects, which is kind of the norm for juniors. I think specifically mentioning their contribution in that project and, just being able to showcase that bit evidently, I think makes a lot of difference.
Cool. Is there anything you would add to that, Claire Rogers? Or
I'm probably not the right person to answer this. I've only ever hired one person, and that was in a two-person company at that time, so it wasn't really that relevant. I mean, I just chatted to them. So I mean, I'm not a big fan of coding tests at all, because it's, you know, it's not as actually, you know, someone said before in the past, you know, it's you don't code like that. You know, you don't have the sort of Damocles hanging over you.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. You did work on the Fire Engine, which did provide a lot of my students with some really good portfolio demos there. So,
brilliant.
Okay, so the C++ community has got a bit of a reputation for being gladiatorial. And, you know, is it inclusive enough as a community? And are there enough diverse role models in the field of C++ programming as a result? So I know you've done some work in this area, Guy. So do you want to talk about that?
Certainly. About 4 years ago, I sent out a rather joking tweet about why isn't there a diversity and inclusion group called #include. And it turned out that lots of people thought this was a really good idea and one started. If you go to includecpp.org, you can find out all about what we do. But to directly answer your question, well, no, of course it isn't. It absolutely isn't. If you look at a random sample of 1,000 people from the UK population, for example, the representation of gender and ethnicity, and age is nothing like that in the C++ programming community. And there isn't necessarily a good reason for that to be the case. So I'm very keen to, well, reduce hiring costs. If there are more, if there are more people participating, there are more programmers. There's, it raises everybody's game. If we have more people to choose from.
Definitely. Claire Blackshaw, what are your thoughts on this?
The biggest thing I'd say here is that every experienced, senior, talented person I have worked with who has a lot to offer in the area of C++ and programming skills is very open-minded, inclusive, thoughtful, very wonderful to deal with. All of that gladiatorial nonsense, all of that nitpicky, that grammar Nazi kind of C++ behavior you see is from people who are insecure in their skills, and it's usually from people you don't need to even talk to. So just ignore them and move on.
It's a really good point. Deepa.
Well, I've been in the games industry for a year now, and I've seen that there is a conscious effort to make this industry more inclusive and diverse. And I think the reason is that because there is a genuine reason for it. There is genuinely a room for improvement. I think we've got more people who go, like diversity in creative areas rather than C++. Yeah, I think there is no reason. And this, I think the fact that C++, it's just in the games industry. There are people who are learning C++, but are in different industries. So it's not a fact that it's C++ on its own. It's the two combined, probably.
What are your thoughts on this, Claire Rogers?
It's a lot better than it used to be. Massively better than it used to be, but it's still got a long way to go. I mean, it can be a lonely place, especially once you get to my age. It can be quite a lonely place because you go to a conference and you're surrounded by men, usually white men, and it can get tiring. That's not saying that there aren't lovely people working in this industry, but it needs to improve, and that needs to start at school, really. It's got a long way to go.
Absolutely. What would you say then is the biggest challenge for graduates entering a career in game programming then? Claire Blackshaw.
The honest truth is any creative career you want to pursue, whether it is filmmaking, video games, anything that's interesting and enticing, there are way more graduates than there are jobs. And your challenge is to stand out because the bulk of your class probably won't have a long-term career.
Cool. Anything anybody else would like to add to that? Or should we take some?
Let's go bang on there. There are far too many applicants and, for the jobs available. I'm delighted that the universities are turning out so many talented and skilled people. Perhaps they need to band together and form their own companies rather than trying to join other people's.
I would say that 100%. Absolutely. Do it when you're young, because when you get to my age, you really, really want to do it, and you have got a mortgage. I mean, I haven't got kids, but you've got kids, you've got all these other things. You can't afford it. Do it. Join with your colleagues and create your own company.
Though I will just jump in there on that point, because if you look at the stats for indie success, people who've had even a year of experience in an established company are much more likely to succeed as an independent. So if that is the route you want to go, try at least get that year of work experience.
Yeah. If they're not able to get hired, then
no, exactly.
It is true. It's everyone wants to be in games. You know, it's a hugely popular industry to get into. Sorry.
Okay, so we've had some questions on the chat then. So somebody asking, well, okay, C++ is undoubtedly here to stay, and don't really think that it'll be lost from programming degrees anytime soon. But are there other languages that you'd be interested in seeing on their CV? Or is it just a case of if you haven't got C++, you might as well go home? Who wants to take that?
I'd have a go at answering it. It's not really that relevant to me, but I'm less interested in what the language you know is, as opposed to kind of having an understanding of what's going on at the hardware level, or being able to use the debugger. The languages, for me, it's quite. I mean, I use C, as I said. That's not that popular a language. So, and when I use C++, I'm not using a lot of the modern stuff.
Sorry, I was going to say, so it's coming back to that sort of understanding of what those languages do on the hardware, and when you're talking about assembly.
Yeah, that's what I mean. But I'm a graphics programmer, so a lot of the stuff I do is in shader languages as well. So I mean, having experience with a graphics API, would it be like OpenGL or Vulkan or DirectX, would be, if you can do that, you could. It doesn't really matter what the base language is.
Cool. Anybody else want to add anything on that?
I'd say having some scripting languages under your belt, like Python, or something that you can build tooling with quickly. And obviously knowing C# is useful given Unity's dominance. And if you're working in server stuff, knowing a bit of Go is useful because that's becoming more popular. Though at the bulk, I would say you need C++ on there, because if I see all those other languages on a CV, but I don't see C++ and someone else has C++ on their CV, that first filter stage is just not going to knock you out. That's not to say you can't do the job. It's just there's a certain amount of applicants, and it's an easy filter for HR to apply.
So another question, do the panel really think there's a danger of educational providers dropping C++ from our courses? I suppose I can probably answer this one. It's not so much that we would expect people to drop them if they're already there built into the course, but I certainly know that, for example, in larger departments where there might be a common teaching language for Java, then there is a pull there towards, teaching common first years, reducing the amount of specific coverage of C++ as a programming language compared to sort of generic study of something like Java as a programming language. So I have seen that happen.
I'd interject that it's certainly the case that C++ is becoming easier and easier to teach as the language is refining. A lot of the more complicated, constructs are being deprecated and replaced with, easier things to use. Although the language is getting larger, it's getting simpler. The reason why it's getting larger is because of backwards compatibility. The reason why it's getting simpler is because, people are having better ideas about how to do things.
Cool. So there's then some questions about sort of what's the future in terms of skills, and do we see sort of other programming languages coming in the future? What are the roles of sort of DevOps and LiveOps, and the sort of full production life cycle of games? Would anybody like to sort of comment on that in terms of future skills?
Claire.
Okay, I would say, so one of the things I'm focused on at the moment is VR, and OpenXR is a thing that's out there now, much like OpenGL was out there back in the day. But unlike when OpenGL hit the scene, I saw coders kind of dive onto it. And I think even though VR is picking up in a big way, because everyone is using pre-made engines, very few people are actually building a fundamental understanding of the basic tool that we're going to be using going forward. So yeah, always dig out for those interesting future APIs. And I think OpenXR is a good example.
I was going to add that one of the reasons why C++ took over from C as the the primary game development language was because C++ is compatible with C. I've seen people say, "Oh, we should build a Rust engine," and I think to myself, well, you can try, but you're starting from scratch. There's very little out there to help you. Rust may become a more useful language for this sort of thing in 5 or 10 years' time. But I have a hunch that by the time it does, it's going to suffer from the same sorts of problems as C++ does, which are not necessarily language problems, but environment and ecosystem problems. So, don't nail your colors to any, learn how to program rather than learn C++. Learn how to write code, learn how to debug code, edit code, learn how to use the tools. I don't care if you know what a customization point object is. What I care about is that you know how to choose an algorithm and choose a data structure.
We've got some questions about the best way for candidates to show off their programming skills in portfolios. Do you prefer code snippets, video demonstrations with commentaries, finished projects, algorithm implementations? Deepak, do you want to take this?
I like to see code snippets as well, to see their coding, the way of coding and like the principles they follow while coding as well, and also finished projects, and as I said, like a clear mention of their contribution and what they've done as part of it.
Cool. So one other question, are there any programming areas that are less competitive than others, such as graphics? I don't know, I'd say that's probably more competitive, isn't it, Claire?
Yes, yeah, it is pretty difficult to kind of get into, and it's getting more complicated because the modern graphics APIs are very complex. And actually, I think that probably one of the simplest APIs is Apple's Metal, I believe. I would have said PlayStation, GNM on PlayStation 4 and stuff like that, but obviously it's difficult to get access to. Yeah, it's competitive, but it's a very, everyone knows everyone in the graphics arena. So it's a good place to be if you're interested in that sort of thing, but it can be quite challenging to get into.
Audio is a good way in.
Yes, there's never enough audio programmers.
Yeah, there's never enough audio programmers, and audio is actually quite simple. It's not enormously mathematically demanding in the same way that graphics is, or rather there is less sort of mathematical input into the audio realm than there is into the graphics realm. But certainly graphics, AI, they're oversubscribed. But audio would be a good way in.
Cool, that's a good tip.
I would say more than anything, you have to follow your passion.
Yeah.
As a student, it's a good time to actually try out the different areas and find out what interests you. But it's the thing that's, whatever area of programming you're interested in is going to be the best one for you to pursue. And the other thing I'd say on the competitive angleness is to take graphics API as an example. Vulkan and Metal and the modern console APIs are very similar, but they're also very different from the previous generation. So there is a lot of older graphics programmers who, I wouldn't use the words left in the dust, but they're struggling with the transition. And so if that's your first graphics API, you have some of an advantage there. And that's true across all tech. There is a churn of tech there. So follow your passion.
Cool. And am I right in thinking you describe yourself as a creative programmer on your website, Claire? So
yeah, I tend to be very good at applying tech in weird ways and breaking things in weird ways. So I've had my fingers in a lot of pies. yeah.
Sounds like a lot of fun. So another question, what's the competition like for technical artist roles? So that's interesting. So do you have roles in your studios where there's this sort of in-between artist and programmer role? For you, Guy, is that something you
Yes,
reckon?
we do have technical artists at Creative Assembly. I don't oversee them in any particular in any way. They might occasionally come and ask me to look at a bit of code, but I'm not especially familiar with the role.
Okay. Deepa, do you?
Yeah, I mean, we've got tech artist roles as well. Like in terms of what the competition is like, I mean, I think tech art is probably it's really important. It's probably less emphasized on as well in some places, but it is a nice blend for those people who are creative, who want to get into a creative bit, but also like programming. It's a nice way to get in. Yeah, it's a nice role, I think, to have a bit of both. Yeah.
Certainly know at Sumo, we highly value people that can span those two disciplines, and it's a very employable and difficult to recruit to.
Yes.
So.
I would just urge caution to some extent. I think in a way it's almost like I wish I could be in that role, because as a graphics programmer, I need an artist to create. I mean, I can do some 3D modeling and stuff, but I generally need an artist to create stuff that looks nice for me. If I had both skills, I would be sorted. It's like a dual class Dungeons and Dragons character. But I would be careful, because some companies do tend to use tech artists as somewhat cheaper programmers, and I think that's wrong. I'm not going to name any names, but I've encountered it where they basically heap most arts. You've got some tech artists who want to focus mainly on the art side, but they'll do tech as well, and you've got some that want to do coding, and some of them will get lumped doing more and more code related stuff when they really want to do mainly art related stuff. And so just need to be mindful of. They're good roles, and if you can get it. And so as a graphics programmer and an artist, it's the perfect role.
I would say my career is basically, to follow that D&D metaphor, my career has been one of multi-classing the whole way through. And I will say the big danger you will run into constantly is, so for instance, I've worked as a lead designer and I've worked as a technical designer as well. And if you're in a mixed role, everyone who is a programmer will assume you're a shit programmer, and everyone who's a designer will assume you're not very good at design. And the same thing happens to technical artists sometimes, and often they will try to pay you whichever is the cheapest salary. So the blended roles are always needed. Doesn't matter which blend of disciplines it is. I mean, as I say, I've made my career out of it. But it is a harder path sometimes to follow, because you have to prove yourself twice over, and it can be a bit of a struggle to prove yourself to the different departments.
Oh, that's a really interesting perspective from somebody who's been there, so that's cool. So somebody is saying that they worked on Total War Rome during their placement year, Guy.
Who's this?
Charlie? Is that, so what tips could the panelists share that they learned during their careers using C++ that could be helpful for graduates entering the industry?
Sorry, I don't understand the question. Can you repeat it?
So I think it's just a general, you know, what generally tips would you offer to students that, I suppose, things you've learned across your career that you didn't know at the start that you do know now?
Learn assembly, learn a debugger. You know, if you're in a product, you know, Claire was absolutely right. Work with other code and just watch it work. Step through it with a debugger, and watch the assembly change and watch the registers change. Just understand how this stuff works.
Cool. Claire Rogers, what do you wish you knew when you were a new graduate?
I don't know. I would say learn Visual Studio, get comfortable in Visual Studio. I mean, Visual Studio Code is becoming popular, but I'd say the vanilla Visual Studio, I mean, for me, it pretty much targets every platform I want. I mean, I'm like Blackshaw. I do a lot of work in VR. So I'm doing Android, I'm doing Windows, and I can target both from Visual Studio. It's fantastic from that point of view.
So many features, aren't there, to Visual Studio? Yeah. I remember my shock and surprise the first time I accidentally dragged a 3D model onto Visual Studio and it displayed it.
Yes.
But the profiling tools, you know, there's lots of really cool stuff built in that people can learn and get a lot out of. So I think it's a really good point. So what about you, Claire, Blackshaw?
I'd say don't stress over what's popular today. Your career is going to be long. While it might be in the interests of your current game, your current studio to use a particular engine, a particular tool, even a particular language, the key thing is that you build up core skills, things like understanding of hardware, things like lower level technical understanding. You follow your passions because you have to build the skills for your career, and hopefully it'll be a long and fruitful one. You don't have to focus on just what's popular now, because you're going to be in the industry for over a decade, 2 decades, 4 decades, whatever you're aiming for, you know.
I think one of the interesting things about these kind of core skills that you've all talked about is they are the kind of things you could learn on a relatively low spec PC. So, I mean, there's been a lot of discussion at this conference about access to technology. Yet the kinds of things we've talked about here can be done with a free version of Visual Studio and, I don't know, you know, probably a 5-year-old computer, you can learn the same things.
Yeah, a cheap laptop, Visual Studio Community Edition, you're good to go. You can run a million seller on that.
Jake, I don't know if you know Brian Buchan, the place in Breda in Holland. He's massively into teaching stuff on single board computers like the Raspberry Pi and stuff like that. I mean, I mean, like, you're not necessarily going to be doing the same kind of stuff as you do on a PlayStation 5, but you know, a Raspberry Pi is a good, you know, especially the more recent ones, is a good place to start. I mean, and that costs next to nothing.
Yeah, good point.
And another area the tools have got really interesting, and that's worth looking at if you're interested in hardware, because it's quite hard to get, say, the PS5 all in its entirety in your head. If you go and you look at like the Game Boy Advanced homebrew tools, for example, the IDEs and the tooling that they've built there are very, very good, and it'll allow you to get an entire system in your head.
Fantastic. So Deepa, have you got any sort of tips and advice for graduates that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Well, I'm probably not eligible for this question because I'm literally starting out in the games industry. But what I probably say is you're in the games industry because most likely that you're passionate about it. Understand, I mean, nothing is set. I think there are a wide variety of roles that you can play in the gaming industry. So, you know, make sure that your initial years in it is finding out what you really like and then pursuing it, really.
Awesome. Right, well, I think we're approaching the end of our time, but really appreciate you all sort of giving up your time to talk about C++ today. And I know I've learned a lot, and I'm sure the students that get to watch this video ultimately will be able to learn a lot from it too. So, Rick, do you take over there?
Thank you so much. What a fascinating session and so much experience, and it's generous of you to share that with I think a lot of students in the audience today. So I'm sure that we will spread this far and wide. Thank you so much. So that's the last session of today, the first day. But up tomorrow we have a day on pathways, and what we mean by pathways is that you shouldn't see careers in games as a pipeline and there's a single way in and a single way to get that job, because there are so many different jobs for so many different kinds of people who come in through lots of different angles, as we've just been hearing. So tomorrow we have students, we've got mentees and mentors, we've got recent hires, we've got young, diverse developers talking about their pathways into games careers. We have Unity giving a keynote, and we also have a review of Games Careers Week, the first of its kind. So look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow morning. Thank you so much to all of our speakers today, and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.